Out here with the gang.
Gang just like trying. Feel me?
Rennie's just retarded.
It was Thanksgiving Day, a time for family, food, and gratitude. Across Minneapolis, homes were filled with laughter, the aroma of turkey, and the warmth of togetherness. But inside one home on James Avenue North, the atmosphere was tense. What should have been a peaceful evening turned into one of unimaginable tragedy. Raven Gant, just 27 years old, had spent the day preparing, giving, smiling. She had even posted online offering an extra turkey to anyone in need, a small gesture that showed her heart. She was kind, giving, a devoted mother to her little girl, JJ. She didn't know that just hours later, her life would be stolen by the very man who once claimed to love her. That night, Raven arrived at Randall Watkins' home, her ex-partner and the father of her child. She came only to pick up a few clothes. She brought no anger, no threats. She simply wanted to gather her things and return to her daughter, who was just outside. But Randall had other intentions, dark, dangerous ones. In an instant, everything shattered. As Raven entered the house, Randall pulled out a gun and shot her in the back. No argument, no warning, just violence. She collapsed between the kitchen and dining room, bleeding out on the floor of a home she once knew. And tragically, their little girl, only a toddler, witnessed it all. Imagine the horror of a child pointing to her mother's lifeless body. That's what police encountered when they arrived. Randall, emotionless, was standing at the door with a loaded revolver in his pocket. It was as if he had already decided this night would end in blood. The paramedics did all they could, but Raven died shortly after arriving at the hospital. This was more than a domestic dispute. It was a cold-blooded execution. A young mother gunned down on a holiday that should have brought her joy. A little girl traumatized forever by the image of her mother falling to the floor. And a family forced to mourn in the middle of a season meant for gratitude. But Raven wasn't just a victim. She was vibrant, full of life. Her friends described her as stylish, funny, loyal. Her family adored her. Her daughter was her world. And her story, while tragic, deserves to be told, not just in whispers of grief, but in shouts for justice and awareness. This story is about love gone wrong. It's about control, fear, and what happens when a woman tries to leave an abusive situation. Raven had been trying to move on. She had hidden bruises, covered black eyes, and smiled through the pain. She had been protecting her daughter and herself. But Randall didn't want to lose that control. This is a story of silence, of the things that go unsaid in toxic relationships. It's about how abusers manipulate and isolate. It's about how the most dangerous moment in a victim's life is often when they finally try to walk away. And for Raven, that moment came on Thanksgiving. Before we dive deeper into who Raven was, the history of her relationship with Randall, and how the justice system responded, we ask you to pause. And remember, Raven Gant was more than a headline. She was a mother, a daughter, a friend, and her story matters. Before the headlines, before the heartbreak, Raven Gant was simply Raven, a bright, spirited woman whose presence lit up every room she entered. At 27 years old, she was in the midst of building her life. She had dreams, ambition, and above all, she had love for her little girl, JJ, who was the center of her world. Raven wasn't just a mother. She was a nurturer by nature. Friends say she could make anyone feel seen. She had a vibrant personality, a great sense of humor, and a style all her own. She loved fashion, music, and making people laugh. Her life wasn't perfect, but she faced every challenge with quiet strength and a soft heart. She worked in hospitality and had aspirations of moving up in the hotel industry. She was the kind of employee who remembered guest names and made sure everyone felt welcome. At work, she was dependable. At home, she was devoted. Whether she was cooking dinner for her daughter or helping a friend through a tough time, Raven gave of herself completely. Family meant everything to her. She was close to her brother, Ronald, and often leaned on her parents for support and guidance. Even when life got hard, and it did, Raven carried herself with grace. She was learning to navigate adulthood, co-parenting, and independence all at once. And she was doing it the best way she knew how, with love at the center of everything. But like so many women, Raven kept some of her pain tucked away behind her smile. She didn't always speak openly about what was happening behind closed doors. Those closest to her knew she had been in a difficult relationship with Randall Watkins, the father of her child. They'd seen her pull away. They'd seen the bruises. But like many survivors, Raven tried to manage the situation quietly. She wanted to believe Randall could change, that things could be stable for their daughter's sake. She tried to keep the peace, to co-parent, to stay safe. It's a line too many women are forced to walk, loving their children while fearing what might happen if they completely walk away from the other parent. Despite the turbulence in her personal life, Raven remained optimistic. In her last Facebook post, just hours before her death, she offered a turkey to anyone who needed one. That simple post captured who she was: generous, thoughtful, and always thinking of others. She lived her life with compassion, even when she wasn't receiving the same in return. Her daughter, JJ, was her everything. Raven poured her heart into raising her, making sure she felt secure, loved, and supported. The bond between them was unbreakable. They had a rhythm, a shared joy that only a mother and daughter could know. In photos, you can see that joy, wide smiles, hugs, and matching outfits. Raven loved being a mom. Those who knew her never imagined the unthinkable would happen. Yes, there have been signs. Yes, there have been concerns. But Raven had been working toward freedom. She had been trying to protect her daughter. She was doing what so many women in dangerous situations try to do: leave carefully, quietly, and safely. And yet, even with all her efforts, it wasn't enough. Because abuse doesn't always end when a relationship does. It lingers, it festers, and sometimes it strikes back when it senses it's losing control. For Raven, that strike came on a holiday that should have been filled with love, and the world lost a beautiful soul far too soon. At first, Raven Gant and Randall Watkins shared something that resembled hope. They weren't just a couple. They were two people connected by a child, by history, and at one time by love. When their daughter, JJ, came into the world, Raven hoped for a partnership, something stable and secure for the little life they had created together. But Randall was older, more than a decade older, and with that difference came a power imbalance that quietly took root. What might look like maturity on the outside soon revealed itself as control. Raven, still figuring out her path, often found herself caught between trying to maintain peace and slowly losing pieces of herself. The relationship began showing cracks early on. Randall's temper surfaced in ways that left Raven shaken. It started with arguments, then escalated to emotional manipulation. Family members noticed how Raven withdrew from conversations about her personal life. She no longer smiled the same way when Randall's name came up. She was holding something back. Behind closed doors, the signs of abuse became clearer. Raven sometimes showed up with bruises, once with a black eye. She covered it up, brushed it off, and insisted she was okay. But those closest to her knew something was wrong. They could see the fear in her eyes, the weight in her voice. She was shrinking. Still, like so many survivors, Raven wanted to believe things could get better. Randall wasn't just her ex. He was a father of her child. Leaving wasn't as simple as walking out the door. Co-parenting required communication, exchanges, and trust. Things that are nearly impossible when fear lurks in every conversation. Her brother, Ronald, later said Raven had been hiding so much. She didn't want to worry her family. She didn't want to cause a scene. And like many women who experience domestic violence, she likely hoped that if she just stayed calm, just did everything right, things wouldn't escalate. But abusers don't need a reason to explode. Control is the only goal. Even when they weren't officially together, Randall still tried to exert control over her. He wanted to know where she was, who she talked to, what she was doing. He didn't want her to move on. And Raven, doing her best to co-parent, kept trying to navigate the situation without triggering his anger. It was a delicate, dangerous line to walk. Raven didn't publicize her pain. There were no angry rants online, no police reports that told the full story. She carried her fears quietly, in the way many survivors do, balancing on hope and hesitation. trying to survive while protecting her child. She was strong, but even the strongest hearts can break under the weight of constant fear. What began as a relationship became a trap, and even as she planned to move forward, to live life on her own terms, Randall couldn't let go. His love wasn't love, it was possession. And when Raven made one final attempt to assert her independence by showing up to collect her things, he responded not with conversation, but with a gun. It's important to say this plainly. Raven didn't stay because she was weak. She stayed because she was human, hopeful, scared, and trying to do what she believed was best for her daughter. But in the end, her quiet strength met a violent end at the hands of someone who refused to let her go. November 22nd, 2018. Across Minneapolis, homes were filled with the smell of food, the sound of laughter, and the warmth of connection. Raven Gant, true to her nature, was giving even on that day. She had posted on Facebook offering an extra turkey to anyone who needed it. That's who she was. Thoughtful, generous, always thinking of others. But behind her bright smile, that day was something heavier. Raven had made plans to stop by Randall Watkins' house to pick up some of her belongings. He was her ex and the father of her child, and despite their rocky past, she tried to keep the peace. She wasn't there to argue. She wasn't there to fight. She just wanted to retrieve her things and get back to her daughter, JJ, who was nearby. Raven brought her daughter with her, but left the toddler in the car, a decision likely made for protection. Maybe Raven knew it might be tense. Maybe she hoped it would be quick. But she couldn't have imagined just how dangerous the situation would become. She couldn't have predicted that this would be her last moment. As Raven entered the home on James Avenue North, something shifted. What happened inside may never be fully known, but what is clear is that Randall didn't hesitate. He pulled out a revolver and shot her in the back. There was no chance to run, no time to scream. It was a cold and calculated act of control, one final, irreversible decision. Raven collapsed on the floor between the kitchen and dining room, alone, bleeding, dying. The home that once held memories now echoed only silence. Outside, her toddler waited. Too young to understand, too innocent to expect the horror she was about to witness. It is believed that JJ either saw or found her mother immediately after. When police arrived at the scene, Randall Watkins met them at the door. He was eerily calm, as if nothing had happened. In his pocket, a loaded revolver, the weapon that had ended a beautiful life. And it was Raven's daughter, JJ, who pointed the officers to her mother's body, a toddler, forced to become a witness. Paramedics rushed Raven to North Memorial Health Hospital. They fought to save her, but the damage was too severe. She was pronounced dead before the clock even struck midnight. A day of thankfulness had turned into one of unspeakable loss. A mother was gone. A daughter was orphaned, and a family was shattered. The ripple of shock spread fast. Family members arrived at the hospital in disbelief. Friends checked Facebook, stunned that someone who had just been offering kindness hours earlier was now gone. Her mother, her father, her brother. They were forced to face a reality no family ever wants to face. Raven had been taken. What made the loss even harder to bear was how preventable it felt. This wasn't a random act. This wasn't a stranger. This was someone Raven knew, someone she tried to manage, to avoid conflict with, to co-parent with. She had tried to survive, and still, she was killed by the man who once promised to love her. On that fateful day, the world didn't just lose another life. It lost a light. Raven Gant was more than the victim of a crime. She was a woman trying to reclaim her life. And what happened that Thanksgiving night remains one of the most heartbreaking reminders of how dangerous leaving an abuser can truly be. The moment law enforcement arrived at the home on James Avenue North, they stepped into a scene that would forever be etched in their memory. The call had come around 10:30 p.m., a report of a domestic dispute and possible gunfire. What they discovered upon arrival was far worse than they could have imagined. Standing at the doorway was Randall Watkins, calm, cold, silent. He didn't flee, didn't hide. He met the officers face to face with a loaded revolver tucked in his pocket, the same weapon used to end Raven Gant's life. There was no struggle, no resistance. It was as if he had made peace with what he had done, Or perhaps he simply didn't care. Inside the house, just beyond the kitchen, officers found Raven. She was motionless. Blood pooled beneath her. The energy in the room shifted from caution to urgency. First responders sprang into action, performing CPR and rushing her to the hospital. But even then, there was a sinking feeling, like they already knew they were too late. But perhaps the most heartbreaking witness that night wasn't an officer or a neighbor. It was Raven's toddler, JJ. The little girl, barely old enough to speak in full sentences, did something no child should ever have to do. She pointed to her mother's body. That small gesture spoke volumes. It told investigators what had happened. Without a single word, Randall was immediately arrested. The officers didn't need a drawn-out investigation to know something awful had occurred. He had the gun. He had the motive. He had a history. The bruises Raven once wore weren't invisible anymore. They were part of a pattern, and the pattern had ended in murder. As the investigation unfolded, detectives pieced together the story Raven had been too scared to tell fully. Friends and family confirmed that she had been abused in the past, that she had tried to leave him, that she was afraid. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a crime of control, one that had been brewing quietly for far too long. Randall faced multiple charges: second-degree intentional murder, second-degree unintentional murder, and illegal possession of firearm. His prior criminal record, already marred by felonies, meant he wasn't even supposed to have a gun. And yet, he did. And with it, he took the life of the woman who had shared a home, a child, and once a dream with him. Police quickly confirmed that this wasn't an isolated moment of anger. It was a deliberate act, a decision. They found no signs of a struggle, no signs of self-defense. Just a man who waited for Raven to show up and then pulled the trigger. The evidence was clear. The horror was undeniable. For Raven's family, the arrest brought a strange mix of emotions. Relief that he had been caught, anger that it had come too late, and grief, deep, aching grief, that no amount of justice could undo what had been done. Her father, her mother, her brother, all of them had to face the harsh truth. Raven was gone, and Randall was responsible. The investigation may have ended with handcuffs and paperwork, but the damage left behind was immeasurable. A little girl would now grow up without her mother. A family would forever have an empty seat at every holiday table. And the community would carry the memory of a young woman who should still be here, laughing, living, loving. Instead, her story became evidence in a case no one ever wanted to see happen. After Raven's murder, her family braced themselves for a long and painful legal journey. Grief was already overwhelming, but now they had to face courtrooms, testimonies, and the man who had taken their daughter's life. Justice, though necessary, would not come quickly or easily, but they showed up for Raven, for JJ, and for every woman who never got a second chance. Randall Watkins was charged with second-degree intentional murder, second-degree unintentional murder, and illegal firearm possession. His past made the charges even more serious. He was a convicted felon who wasn't legally allowed to own a gun. And yet, he had one. And with it, he made a choice that cost a woman her life. The prosecution built a strong case, one rooted in evidence and supported by a chilling pattern of domestic violence. They painted a clear picture. Randall wasn't acting in self-defense. He wasn't caught in the heat of passion. This was cold, intentional, a calculated act of control carried out in the presence of a child. The weight of that reality hung heavy in the courtroom. Witnesses took the stand. Raven's family recounted the bruises they had seen. Her brother, Ronald, spoke of her fear and silence. The investigators described the scene. And though JJ was too young to speak in court, her role in this case was undeniable. Her presence in home, her tiny voice that pointed to the truth without words. Randall's defense had little room to move. The evidence was stacked. The motive was clear. And the heartbreak left in his wake was impossible to ignore. Jurors listened, watched, and sat with the uncomfortable truth that a man can live life so casually and then stand by the door as if nothing had happened. On October 23rd, 2020, the jury delivered their verdict, guilty on all counts. Randall Watkins was convicted for taking the life of Raven Gant. Her family wept. Tears not a celebration, but of release. There would be no more delays, no more uncertainty. The man who murdered their daughter would be held accountable. 2 weeks later, on November 6, 2020, Randall stood before the judge for sentencing. The court handed down the maximum sentence, 40 years in prison. It was the harshest punishment available under the law, and yet it still felt too small compared to the life lost. Raven would never get 40 more years. She would never get one. Prosecutor Mike Freeman acknowledged the pain of the case. He called it heartbreaking, especially knowing Raven was killed in front of her daughter. The tragedy echoed far beyond the courtroom. It was felt in every mother raising her child alone, in every woman trapped in fear, and in every friend who wondered, could I have done more? Raven's family left the courthouse carrying the heavy weight of both justice and loss. Justice had spoken, but it could never bring Raven back. Still, they found strength in knowing her story had been heard, loud and clear, and that Randall would spend the rest of his days behind bars, without the power to hurt anyone else. The legal proceedings didn't just secure a conviction. They gave voice to a woman who could no longer speak for herself. And in doing so, they gave her family and community a measure of peace, a foundation to build healing upon. Raven's light had been taken, but in that courtroom, her truth shined. Raven Gant was not just a name in a courtroom or a victim in a police report. She was a heart of her family, the light in her daughter's life, and a cherished friend to many. Her loss left a hole that could never be filled. In the weeks following her death, her absence echoed in every phone call that didn't come, every room she once lit up, and every holiday that would never be the same. Her family grieved deeply, not only for what was taken, but for what would never be. Raven would never get to see her daughter's first day of school. She'd never celebrate another birthday, hear JJ call her mommy again, or walk down the aisle one day in joy. These moments were stolen in an instant, and that absence, so deep, so permanent, haunted everyone who loved her. The community, too, felt the impact. Raven's story spread quickly across Minneapolis and beyond. People were shaken by the violence, especially because it happened on a holiday inside a home and in front of a child. Vigils were held. Friends gathered not just to mourn, but to speak her name aloud, refusing to let her become just another forgotten statistic. Those who knew her described Raven as generous, funny, stylish, and full of life. She had a gift for making people feel welcome, whether it was helping someone find a job, sharing a meal, or simply offering a listening ear. She left behind a legacy of kindness. That's why her death hurt so deeply. It didn't make sense. How could someone so full of love be taken by someone so full of control? For Raven's daughter, JJ, the impact is lifelong. She may have been too young to understand everything then, but the memory of that night will live with her. She'll grow up without the warm hugs of her mother, without the bedtime stories, the laughs, the lessons, and the love that only a mother can give. No sentence for Randall could undo what JJ lost. In the wake of the tragedy, Raven's family found strength and unity. They leaned on each other, supporting JJ, keeping Raven's memory alive in stories and photos, and the way they showed up for one another. They vowed to speak out, to become advocates for victims of domestic violence, so that no other family would have to feel this kind of pain. The community rallied behind them. Local organizations dedicated candlelight vigils in Raven's name. Support groups used her story to raise awareness about domestic violence and the dangers women face when trying to leave toxic relationships. Her name became a symbol, not just a tragedy, but of strength, resilience, and the need for change. Churches, neighbors, and even strangers who had never met Raven reached out with words of comfort, donations, and love. Her story moved people. It opened eyes. It forced conversations about what warning signs look like and how we can better support the women in our lives who are suffering in silence. Even in death, Raven continued to bring people together. Her story reminded the world that domestic violence doesn't always look like shouting or broken dishes. Sometimes it's quiet. It's in the fear that makes someone lie about a bruise. It's in the hesitation to speak up. And too often, it ends in silence that lasts forever. Through the heartbreak, Raven's family holds tightly to one truth. She mattered. Her life had meaning. Her love had depth. And though she was taken far too soon, her story continues to inspire strength, awareness, and a fierce fight for justice, for her, and for every woman who didn't make it out alive. Raven Gant was just 27 years old when her life was taken. Randall Watkins, at 41, was more than a decade older. On paper, age is just a number. But in relationships, especially when one partner holds more life experience, power, or financial control, an age gap can become an invisible weapon. And in Raven's case, it contributed to a dynamic that gradually shifted from partnership to possession. Older abusers often use their age or maturity as leverage. They convince younger partners that they know better, slowly dismantling their confidence. For women like Raven, who are still finding their voice and independence, this imbalance can be paralyzing. What may begin as mentorship or affection can quickly become manipulation and control. Raven may have once believed that Randall's age meant he would provide stability, especially as the father of her child. But what she received instead was dominance masked as love. He used fear to silence her, guilt to keep her close, and control to stop her from moving forward. And like many survivors, she may have felt emotionally trapped long before she ever tried to leave physically. Domestic abuse doesn't always appear with raised voices or broken furniture. Often, it arrives in silence, in the isolation from friends, in the self-doubt planted by repeated put-downs, in the quiet fear that saying no could spark violence. Raven's bruises told one story, but the words she didn't say told an even deeper one of survival beneath the surface. In communities where access to legal help, counseling, and safe housing is limited, young women facing abuse can feel even more cornered. And when the abuser is a co-parent of your child, the stakes are even higher. Do you stay and try to keep things calm? Or do you leave and risk retaliation? Raven faced this impossible question every day. Her story is not rare. Across the country, countless young women are caught in relationships with older, controlling partners who mask abuse in routines and expectations. Raven's case is tragic, but it shines a light on a pattern that needs more attention, on how power imbalances, especially tied to age, can lead to deadly outcomes. If we want to prevent tragedies like Raven's, we must talk about the hidden signs of coercive control. We must educate young women about the difference between love and control. And we must remind them and the world that their lives, their boundaries, and their freedom are worth protecting at every age, in every relationship. Today, Randall Watkins is serving a 40-year prison sentence for the murder of Raven Gant. It's the maximum penalty allowed by the law, a punishment that reflects the severity of what he did. But while he sits behind bars, the people Raven left behind are still trying to heal. Justice was served, but the scars remain. Raven's daughter, JJ, is growing up without her mother. Her family surrounds her with love, but they know that nothing can replace the comfort of Raven's voice, her hugs, or the small daily joys that make childhood feel safe. The road ahead for JJ will be filled with questions, with grief, and hopefully, with healing. And through it all, her mother's story will be the guiding light they hold on to. Raven's loved ones continue to speak her name, to share her story, and to honor her life. They've turned their grief into a mission, raising awareness about domestic violence, helping other women spot the warning signs, and demanding better support systems for survivors. Their courage in the face of unimaginable loss is a testament to Raven's spirit. As a community, we owe it to women like Raven to do more. That means listening when someone says they feel unsafe. It means believing survivors even when they stay silent for a while. It means pushing for stronger laws, better resources, and safe exit strategies for people in abusive relationships. No one should ever have to die for trying to leave. If you or someone you know is in a relationship that feels controlling, fearful, or emotionally damaging, please speak up. Reach out. There are people who care and resources that can help. Leaving is hard, but silence is even harder to live with. Raven's story reminds us just how high the cost can be. Let her life and legacy be the reason we start paying closer attention to our sisters, our mothers, our friends, and even to strangers. Sometimes one check-in, one conversation, one open door can make all the difference. We can't bring Raven back, but we can fight to make sure her story saves someone else. So today we ask you to take action. Share her story. Talk about domestic abuse openly. Support local women's shelters. And if you're watching this and carrying your own quiet pain, know this. you are not alone. There is help, there is hope, and your life, like Raven's, matters deeply.